welcome. If this doesn't work, that's fine. We're online now. Okay. Welcome, number one OG in the chat, ya boy, Woke Patriot. All right, everybody. There it is. There it is on YouTube. Burn in hell, Henry Kissinger. Welcome back, Al Rakabi. Welcome back, Woke Patriot. Yeah, okay, yeah, we'll go ahead and do that. Man, the scams are the only thing that's left on Kick and D Live, man. It's the fascists and the scammers. The fascists and the scammers. How about we just... Oh, man, I gotta log in. Oh, I don't even remember my fucking password. All right, we're just gonna ignore that. We're just gonna ignore that. All right, folks, this is the Henry Kissinger Burn in Hell special. Welcome. Now, a quick addendum here. I normally would frown upon dancing on the grave of a dead person. It's really quite disrespectful. So I wanted to make clear why I am choosing to dance on Henry Kissinger's grave. And you know, I guess, look, there are no absolutes. The older I get, the more I understand that better. There really are no absolutes. Literally everything is a gray area. You know, the people that speak in absolutes are the ones that I trust the least. And the absolute here is that, look, there are people that it's almost always disrespectful to shit on a person after they've died. Almost always. Almost. And here is that almost with Henry Kissinger. And here's why Henry Kissinger deserves this treatment. He was completely unrepentant. He did not apologize. He did not feel remorse. And if you're wondering, well, what did this guy do? Stick around. We are going to be going through an exhaustive list of Henry Kissinger's crimes, what he did to humanity, what he did to global peace, how one man can get thousands, potentially millions of people killed. George Bush is probably another one. George Bush Senior and George Bush. I think I'd add this to the list. Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld. I'm talking, you know, we're talking people that have shown no remorse. I'm not going to go so far and say Obama. With that said, I haven't seen a lot of remorse from Obama either. But we're talking about people in power. Power, not money, power. It's a big difference. With power, you can get people killed. You can get a lot of people killed with power. Or you can feed a lot of people. You can help a lot of people. You know, one of the most important elements of being a good human being is using power to help your species, not hinder your species. And I think it's fair to say Henry Kissinger and those other people I listed have hindered our species, have reduced our species to unnecessary barbarism, for their own sake, for their own ego, for their own power, for their own party, whatever it is, whatever the motivation, your ideology, your politics. When you're getting thousands of people killed and there's not a good goddamn reason in the world for it, you know, and they would say, oh, well, there is a good reason. There is a good reason. Yeah, millions, potentially millions. You know, Lenin, Stalin more than Lenin. You know, Pol Pot, sure. Hitler, obviously, he's king. He's up there at the very top. He's the Elvis of getting people killed. He's the king. Don't clip that. But I just wanted to make this clear about dancing on people's graves, because I do think ultimately it's something we shouldn't get in the habit of. Because turning the other cheek, understanding that people are complicated is an important part of empathy. And we absolutely, as a political movement on the left, as political activists, as people who want change, we have to understand empathy. We have to have empathy, because look, if we're talking about governing, we're talking about policy, we're talking about everybody. And a lot of lefties just want to govern, for them. They forget, that Hillary Clinton strategy of calling everybody deplorable and only trying to appeal to the people that are already listening it's like the opposite of what a politician should be doing. Anyway, enough rambling. Let's get to it. Henry Kissinger, fuck you, burn in hell. Henry Kissinger Sunday special. Hope you're having a good special and welcome Sunday. And I hope everybody, and welcome back, everybody. John Axel, Al Rakabi, Snowmobile Bro, Al, Woke Patriot, some Scammer on Kick. Thank you so much, Scammer on Kick. So this is amazing. I had no idea about this until he died. If COP28 president is oil prince who says there's no science behind demand for phase out. It is really. John Axel. It's amazing to me. I keep mentioning this to my wife ad nauseum. She hates it. She probably hates it. But I keep saying we have the solutions. It's like, the $100 million man or whatever that show was. We have the technology. We can build it. Like, we have all the tech. Sure, some of it's still in its infancy, but we got the ball is rolling. Even with all the resistance, the ball is rolling. The only thing preventing us from having common sense climate change, common sense, policies when it comes to middle class, education, blah blah blah. It's politics. It's politics. It's greedy men standing in the way. And you know who said no to that shit? Christopher Hitchens. So you're really going to enjoy this. Christopher Hitchens put Henry Kissinger on the map as a war criminal. I would say it's fair to say he's probably the reason why most people remember Henry Kissinger as a war criminal, because before then it was he was the media, he was kind of a chummy guy, what's that stupid fucking not stupid show it was just on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, Henry Kissinger was actually in the 60s quite a popular fella. Hopefully, I don't know if I'll be showing anything. Well, maybe I will. We'll see. We'll see if we'll get that history. But in the 60s, believe it or not, he was a swinger. He was a swinger in the 60s, probably the 70s, but he was like a popular guy. He rubbed elbows with all the celebrities, and he was treated as such. Only until like the 90s and the 2000s, maybe in the 80s, I'm not sure. Woke Patriot could maybe tell me. But it really wasn't widely accepted that he was a fucking monster, at least in my eyes, until Christopher Hitchens came along. But anyway, I didn't know this about... I'm babbling, sorry. I didn't know this about Henry Kissinger, but this is crazy. So listen to this. Knew this would fucking happen, and it's funny they turned off comments. Anyways, we got the ADL up here. saying, because Henry Kissinger was Jewish, Henry Kissinger was a towering intellect, diplomat, practitioner, blah, 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 helped shape American foreign policy with a lasting impact worldwide, a refugee from Nazi Germany, and the first Jewish Secretary of State. He was unapologetic about his heritage and his embrace of the importance of American global power and democratic values. So someone's like, I knew this would fucking happen, and it's funny they turned off the comments. Anyways, this is what Kissinger has to say about his heritage. Listen to this. Quote, if it were not for the accident of my birth, I would be anti-Semitic. This guy. He's a fucking monster, dude. Any people who has been persecuted for 2,000 years must be doing something wrong. Holy shit! That's like the Trump comment about dead veterans. That's like the Trump comment. They're losers. Why would I go there? They died. They lost. They suck. They're losers. And he's like, if it were not for the accident of my birth, I would be anti-Semitic. Now, I don't know if this is a book quote or an interview, but the guy, like I said, he was basically treated like a fucking celebrity. He was interviewed all the time. Yeah, exactly.
Cool it with the anti-Semitic remarks.
I mean, come on, man.
Cool it with the anti-Semitic remarks.
And he just, of course he has to be anti-Semitic, of course, right? I mean, that's the thing, and that's why I'm okay pissing on this man's grave. And I was like, when is this fucker gonna die? I mean, that was the fucking joke. Yeah, Lenny, totally. I miss Christopher Hitchens as well. An absolutely brilliant man. Look, he was an unrepentant, shameless monster. Unrepentant, shameless monster. Okay, I'm not gonna sit here and take the high road with this motherfucker. I'm gonna piss on his grave. Fuck you, Henry Kissinger. Rest in piss. I mean, I can't make it any more clear. I can't, you know what I'm saying? I'm not gonna beat around the bush on this one. Fuck you, dude. And you want to find out why? Here's why. Let's get into it. I really should show this. Hold on. I was trying to keep this in around an hour, but honestly, this video from Renegade Cut is just so fucking good. I have to show it. But let's start with the Renegade Cut because it's kind of like a brief overview of the man, the criminal. So we're gonna do a brief overview of the man, the criminal. Then we're gonna get into an interesting Mehdi Hassan video that he did before he was fired. Whoops. You can talk shit about Henry now. That's acceptable, but you can't talk shit about Israel and their their ethnic cleansing. That's a no-no.
Cool it with the anti-Semitic remarks.
So after that, we're gonna get into a really beefy video where, I mean, Christopher Hitchens wrote the motherfucking Bible on Henry Kissinger's crimes, called and did he call it The Trial of Henry Kissinger? Is that the name of the book? Anyway, he wrote this big beefy book, and this is him going through, all the, okay, thank you, Al Rakabi. Wanted to make sure. And he just, in this video, he just goes through all the major points of the book, and it's shocking. It's shocking. He's just a greasy crook. Yeah, kill them all, man. I mean, he's like a supervillain. So let's get into it. Enough of the bloviating.
In her book and in this last debate, she talked about getting the approval or the support or the mentoring of Henry Kissinger. Now, I find it rather amazing because I happen to believe that Henry Kissinger was one of the most destructive secretaries of state in the modern history of this country. I am proud to say that Henry Kissinger is not my friend. I will not take advice from Henry Kissinger. And in fact, Kissinger's actions in Cambodia, when the United States bombed that country, overthrew Prince seeing or created the instability for Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge to come in, who then butchered some 3 million innocent people, one of the worst genocides in the history of the world. So,
is there a documentary based off Christopher Hitchens' book? Because I think I would rather show the documentary than just a dry hour-long, even though Christopher Hitchens is amazing. It'd be more entertaining to watch a documentary that goes over all the points, because it'd show video and everything. But I need to vet it. It probably shows all the really, I mean, fuck, man, the Cambodia war footage is absolutely atrocious. I'm talking really brutal, like machete shit. So I don't know if I could actually show a documentary. Actually, yeah, never mind on that. I'm gonna have to vet it. We'll have to put that on the later list. Yeah, I mean, I can't show some of this shit.
count me in as somebody who will not be listening to Henry Kissinger.
Well, if someone has it on YouTube, please link it in the chat. I'll put it in the documentary section on the Discord. And what I plan on doing is, when I get time, I'm going to go through some of these and censor them where I need to, and then I can show them on Twitch for everybody. But yeah, that would be really great if someone can find that on YouTube or something. Well, there you go. Fucking damn, you guys are so fucking good. Jesus. Woo! Was Hillary a Kissinger fan? Big time. Super proud. And you see here, she doesn't respond. She doesn't really have a good response to this. She's never really put to task, the media never would hold her, because the media agrees, the mainstream media, I should say, agrees with this assessment that Henry Kissinger was a fucking strategic genius, blah, blah, blah. No, he was a fucking murderer.
This tense exchange between Senator Bernie Sanders and Secretary Hillary Clinton received a fair amount of media attention during the 2016 Democratic primaries. Sanders denounced former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger for his actions in Cambodia, in stark contrast to the traditional view of Kissinger as an American hero, patriot, and diplomat emeritus. In 1970, Kissinger opened back channels between the United States and China, ultimately resulting in the establishment of formal diplomatic relations in 1972. The left praised Kissinger for his surprising diplomacy with a communist state during the Cold War, and the right praised him for achieving his secondary goal, driving a wedge between China and the Soviet Union, diminishing the latter's attempts to further its influence in Asia. Kissinger's outreach to China was, in fact, in service of capitalism. Due to this Cold War diplomacy and other affairs throughout his career, Kissinger gained a lifelong status as an advisor to future presidents. Kissinger urged President Bill Clinton to focus on NAFTA instead of healthcare. Kissinger was a secret consultant to the George W. Bush administration, once urging the expansion of the war on terror. Of this, Kissinger once stated, "Because Afghanistan was not enough, and we need to humiliate them." In 2016, the Barack Obama administration honored Kissinger with an awards ceremony where he received a Distinguished Public Service Medal. Until the final months of the Donald Trump administration, Kissinger served on the Defense Policy Board, an influential group of experts advising top Pentagon officials. Kissinger, 98 years old, has only now disappeared into the background and has no more influence on United States foreign policy, as far as we know. The traditional view of Kissinger has been held together through normalization of his presence and advice throughout the presidential administrations. Speaking ill of Kissinger comes from the media, from fact-checkers, from firebrand politicians with nothing to lose, but never from the top. It is well understood, but never openly acknowledged by the president, that Henry Kissinger is a war criminal. While United States foreign policy has been responsible for a tremendous...
Oh, God. I better get my blur filter going here. 1 second. Let me just get this over on the side here. Better get this bad boy warmed up. There we go.
Amount of suffering and clandestine crimes over the past century, even without Kissinger's direct involvement. His contributions to this suffering are staggering in amount and scale.
That is
according to an estimate by The Nation, though an exact number may never be known, approximately 3 to 4 million deaths can be attributed to Kissinger's actions.
Wow, 3 to 4 million. So I was just vastly underestimated. I mean, think of the monstrous. I can't show you this because in the background is these dead bodies in bags getting put in the truck. So I can't show you this, but the text says a back of the envelope count would attribute 3, maybe 4 million deaths to Kissinger's actions, but that number probably undercounts his victims in southern Africa.
When confronted with these colossal figures, several questions come to mind. What did Kissinger do to cause this much damage? And decades later, with irrefutable evidence now collected, why won't anyone do anything about it? Why are American politicians with blood on their hands never tried as war criminals in international courts?
And
Henry Kissinger had reason to be...
This is a very important question. I'll stop pausing after this, but that is a very important question. Because how in the hell can we get to some kind of global unity, some kind of global world peace? Yeah, I said it, world peace. How can we fucking do that without the United States coming to fucking grips, coming to terms and admitting at least some of the crimes?
Paranoid, trauma that contributed to his cynical view of the truth and of humanity, and a career built upon the necessity of suspicion. In 1938, when Kissinger was only 15, he and his family fled Germany to escape persecution. In 1943, Kissinger, like so many other young men of that era, was drafted by the United States to fight in World War II. His knowledge of Germany and his academic studies up to that point allowed him to join military intelligence. He was charged with identifying, arresting, and interrogating German officers, as well as securing confidential informants. According to Greg Grandin, author of Kissinger's Shadow, the tension between fact and truth was not an abstract...
Lenny, great point on Mother Teresa. Yeah, that is, that's a depressing one.
Question for Kissinger.
Sorry, no more pausing.
It was the stuff of life and death. In 1955, Kissinger...
Okay, see, I pause it, and then you lose track of what's saying. Okay, so we're starting over. No more pausing. It's happening. No more fucking pausing.
As well as securing confidential informants. According to Greg Grandin, author of Kissinger's Shadow, the tension between fact and truth was not an abstract question for Kissinger. It was the stuff of life and death. In 1955, Kissinger joined the National Security Council's Operations Coordinating Board. He grew to prominence through a series of books that influenced foreign policy. In his 1957 book, Nuclear Weapons and Foreign Policy, Kissinger advocated the use of nuclear weapons in warfare. In his 1960 book, The Necessity of Choice, Kissinger helped popularize the Cold War term missile gap. These writings influenced policy in the Kennedy administration and encouraged the creation of enough nuclear weapons to wipe out mankind many times over. Proliferation also resulted in a series of close calls over the years that nearly did just that. On March 31st, 1968, with a low approval rating due to the war in Vietnam, President Lyndon B. Johnson appeared on national television and announced that he was partially halting the bombing of Vietnam and that he would not run for re-election. Not long after that, Kissinger contacted a Richard Nixon campaign aide, pledging fealty to Nixon and stating that he would do anything to help him win the presidency. This blanket pledge of anything was soon put to the test. That same year, Kissinger helped Nixon covertly sabotage the Paris peace talks. The goal of the peace talks was to end a devastating conflict that had already killed countless Americans and Vietnamese. The goal of Kissinger and Nixon was to prevent Hubert Humphrey and the Democratic Party from ending an unpopular war ahead of an election. Nixon, through Kissinger, privately assured the South Vietnamese that an incoming...
Think about that. Think about that. They worked their ass off to extend a war. Goddamn, I paused again. But I mean, think about that. They worked their ass off to keep a bloody, brutal war going. How many Americans died? When peace could have been, some kind of pullout, some kind of agreement could have been made.
Republican administration would offer them a better deal than the Democrats. By sabotaging the peace talks, Kissinger was able to sabotage Humphrey's electoral strategy as well. The North Vietnamese wanted the war to end, but every time the North side came close to an agreement, the U.S.-backed South Vietnamese suddenly increased their own demands, making peace impossible.
Wait, isn't Seymour Hersh on my shit list because of his Russia apologetics? God damn it, I paused again. Damn it.
Vietnamese withdrew from the talks on the eve of the election. President Johnson learned of this because the CIA had bugged the office of the South Vietnamese president, and the FBI had bugged the South Vietnamese embassy. CIA recordings and phone calls confirmed this long-suspected rumor.
And they oughtn't to be doing this. This is treason. I know this. That they're contacting a foreign power in the middle of a war.
After speaking to that Republican, Johnson called Nixon and confronted him about this treasonous act, but was unwilling to go public as it would reveal how he learned of it in the first place. Kissinger tried to rewrite history for the victor. Richard Nixon, painting Humphrey and his emissaries as failures for even attempting diplomacy
amazing,
against such an implacable enemy.
Absolutely
and by painting
amazing.
the war in Vietnam not the disastrous anti-communist quagmire that it was, but as an inevitability that they simply had.
No, goddammit, no. I mean, honestly, his what he's doing with Russia, with his fucking sources, no, it makes me put into question his entire body of work. Because you're going to be that wildly dishonest about Russia? What haven't you been wildly dishonest about? All of your hidden sources? Nah, man. No, it makes me question fucking Seymour Hersh's whole body of work, dude. Sources. As long as that shit is sourced, okay, then we can talk. But fuck, man. No, that's what made me so disappointed about fucking Seymour Hersh and the Russia apologetics. No more pause.
To meet.
God damn it.
Throughout the conflict in Vietnam and neighboring nations, the belligerents varied in their attitudes. Some were reluctant participants drafted into service or ordered to commit questionable acts under the mistaken belief that there was no alternative. But Kissinger cannot be given such a defense. He knew that peace was an alternative because he himself helped sabotage that peace. This lack of alibi should be taken into consideration when learning about atrocities in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia with his fingerprints on them. The nations of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia formed a region commonly called Indochina, but the three nations' involvement during the Vietnam War could not be more different. Laos and Cambodia were effectively neutral during the conflict,
I wouldn't make that
but
move
both
off
the
one
North
statement
Vietnamese
either.
and the United States used these territories, often covertly, without the explicit authorization of said nations. However, the manner in which these territories were exploited were quite different. For example, the North Vietnamese used Laotian and Cambodian territory as part of their supply lines. The United States, on the other hand, exploited Laos and Cambodia by carpet bombing their civilians, men, women, and children, in hopes of also striking any unsuspecting North Vietnamese who happened to be there. The Nixon administration called this hot pursuit, a justification for tremendous intentional civilian casualties. While a great many atrocities were committed by United States forces within Indochina, the actions masterminded by Henry Kissinger were among the worst. During the first week of the Richard Nixon administration, the bombing halt was over. Kissinger himself ordered the Pentagon to present a classified briefing on bombing options. Only weeks later, the United States began secretly bombing Cambodia. The political argument against the bombing was self-evident. The United States was not at war with Cambodia.
It didn't work.
The total victims of the Cambodia
Whatever the fucking goal was, it did not work. It didn't work in Vietnam. Nothing. None of this shit works. Barely. It worked. It works once in a while, right? World War II, Ukraine. It makes sense to to buck up and fight back. But 9 times out of 10, dude. The anomaly is when it works, but that's what they want to do every time. Man, that military industrial complex money must be so good.
Bombings are disputed, partially because different historians and government officials use different criteria for who was directly killed by the United States, and most studies do not include victims of U.S. involvement with the Khmer Rouge. But low estimates, such as in the Tufts University study, suggest approximately 250,000 dead,
What
but
did
the
this
highest
accomplish?
estimates reach 600,000. Again, this is only
What
for
in the
these
world did
bombings,
this accomplish?
not the conflict across Indochina in total or the Khmer Rouge genocide. There were also significant casualties in Laos. U.S. bombings in Laos were conducted secretly beginning in 1964 and escalated during the Nixon administration. So secret were these bombings that many in the United States Congress were unaware of it until 1970.
What?
Kissinger made a statement to the press justifying these bombings by claiming that at least American servicemen were not being killed, only Laotians and Vietnamese hiding in Laos. This statement, while morally horrendous, was also untrue. The Pentagon revealed that American servicemen had been killed in Laos during the Nixon administration.
Wow.
These bombings were conducted without authorization by Congress and focused heavily on civilian areas in
Look at
hopes of
this.
striking secret North
$1 million bombs and $1 million planes blowing up fucking straw huts.
Vietnamese bases. Though neutral, Laos suffered as many as
Holy
115,000 casualties, almost exclusively civilian. In addition to Kissinger's initial sabotage of the peace process in 1968, he warned the Nixon administration against suing for peace once again in 1970, explaining that anything resembling surrender could negatively affect Nixon's chances in the 1972 presidential election. In other words, the war in Vietnam was extended year after year for political reasons, first to bring Nixon to power, then again to keep him there. Estimates of casualties in Indochina between 1954 to 1975 vary, partly for political reasons and partly because of the challenge of calculating civilian deaths among massive bombing campaigns. Putting it all together is no small task. Among the most credible and widely sourced estimates comes from Professor Rudolph Joseph Rummel of Yale. In his study, casualties were as high as 3,595,000, including Americans, Vietnamese, Cambodians, and Laotians.
And then a couple years later, we're repeating the cycle in Iraq and Afghanistan. We just couldn't wait to get mired in yet another quagmire.
Both servicemen and civilians. These numbers are staggering, but this total could have been significantly lower without the sabotage and machinations of Henry Kissinger. Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos are the most well-known atrocities connected to Kissinger, but there are other crimes that must be addressed. In late 1970, the Pakistani military elite had permitted the first open elections for a decade. The vote was won by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the leader of the Bengali Awami League. The National Assembly was scheduled to meet on the 3rd of March 1971, but General Khan, leader of the ongoing military regime, refused a peaceful transition. On March 25th, the Pakistani army struck at the Bengali capital of Dhaka and massacred Rahman's supporters. Kissinger, believing General Khan would be more supportive of United States economic interests than Rahman, sent military aid to assist in the genocide. Estimates for the total dead vary due to the chaos, the expulsion of the foreign press, and political interests, but according to the book Kissinger's Shadow, approximately 500,000 were counted among the dead, hundreds of thousands of women abused, and millions displaced from their homes. Allegedly, Nixon privately had concerns that the slaughter was comparable to the Holocaust, but Kissinger told him not to worry. In 1974, East Timor formed a post-colonial leftist government. The movement was known as the Front for the Liberation of East Timor. Under the pretext of anti-communism, East Timor's neighbor, Indonesia, invaded in an obvious power grab in 1975. Immediately before the invasion, Henry Kissinger, then Secretary of State under President Gerald Ford, met with the leaders of Indonesia. The United States supplied Indonesia with the necessary military equipment for the invasion in hopes of expelling the East Timor government and massacring a population that was not friendly to U.S. economic interests. Civilian deaths during this invasion were enormous. The United Nations concluded that the number of East Timorese who died from combat or famine during the occupation could be as high as 202,000, approximately one-third of their entire population. These incidents and massacres are only a sampling of United States war crimes in which Henry Kissinger was involved.
Shocking.
He and Nixon plotted to overthrow Chilean President Salvador Allende. The list goes on and on. Nearly everything stated about Kissinger's involvement in Cambodia, his role in extending the Vietnam War by sabotaging the peace talks, and other crimes are widely known, mostly through first-hand accounts, declassified documents, audio from the CIA and FBI, investigative journalism, and decades of research. The facts are no longer in dispute, only perspective. War hawks excuse the most indefensible actions, and Kissinger is put on a pedestal for his role rather than put on trial for war crimes.
Yeah, he's framed as a realist who, that kind of shit.
Why is that? War crimes are military violations of international law and international treaties, such as the Geneva Conventions. War crimes are most commonly defined by actions like intentional slaughter of innocents and torture. So, given the mountain of evidence, countless civilian deaths, and decades of unaccountable war crimes, why hasn't Henry Kissinger been charged through some international court, or extradited to a nation that he victimized? For that matter, why haven't so many other war criminals living in the United States been tried? International prosecution of Henry Kissinger for war crimes requires a power dynamic which does not exist. The United States is a permanent Security Council member of the United Nations, granting them significant control over global politics, particularly as it pertains to war. The U.S. has military bases all over the world. The U.S. owns a considerable amount of the world's wealth and therefore has controlling interests in a great many trade deals. The U.S. has significant sway over the International Monetary Fund and World Bank. In short, the United States of America is simply not on equal footing with the rest of the world. If, say, Laos wanted to extradite Henry Kissinger, with what could Laos threaten the United States? War? Trade? Allies? If, say, a number of powerful nations pressured the United States to extradite a war criminal, what could they actually do if the U.S. says no? Cut off trade? That would significantly damage the economies of these hypothetical powerful nations. Go to war? That probably would not end well for them, and frankly, it would not be proportional to punishing one man. There is simply no mechanism in which other nations can pressure the United States to do something it does not want to do. Maybe on paper, sure, treaties exist, but not in reality. So, why does the United States
Realpolitik? Is that the term, Woke Patriot?
Want to protect its war criminals anyway? What does the United States gain by allowing Henry Kissinger and so many others to be safe and comfortable? Put simply, allowing Kissinger to be tried in an international court or allowing him to be extradited would not suit U.S. interests. If Kissinger were tried, the details of the trial would be embarrassing to the United States, and if Kissinger were convicted, it would open the door for future war crimes trials. It would prevent the United States from pursuing its policy of military...
I'm pretty sure that was Code Pink as well, you know, and it's like, once again, yeah, I think that's Medea Benjamin right there, maybe. But once again, I mean, you know, I guess she's a little different. Because she hasn't like put on paper I'm an anti-Semite. Exceptionalist justification for illegal actions. Thank you, Woke Patriot. I mean, I was such a big fan of Code Pink until they started making, you know, just day after day after day apologetics for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Got it. It twists me up, man. Noam Chomsky's out of here, man. I had so many of these guys like right next to my heart, and I had to rip them out of my chest.
Crimes trials. It would prevent the United States from pursuing its policy of military interventionism that has, for a long time, furthered its ultimate goal of global supremacy. If Kissinger were convicted, who would be next? Former President George W. Bush?
Yes.
Perhaps every living president, for that matter?
Pretty much.
In order to maintain its global economic goals, the United States would sooner withdraw from an international treaty than help convict its war criminals. And it has. In 2002, for example, the United States effectively withdrew from the treaty that established the International Criminal Court. In 2018, the United States withdrew from the United Nations International Court of Justice. Some treaties end up being more like suggestions for the United States.
Pretty much, yeah.
When Henry Kissinger dies, the articles and obituaries and tributes will most likely call him a controversial figure and balance the millions who died through his actions and policies with the trade deals with China and his friendships with heads of state, as if this tips the scales of this oh-so-complicated man.
Yeah.
Kissinger has written his own history. The United States legitimizes this history through its praise of Kissinger, and it will codify this history by mourning his passing one day. When he dies, anyone who points out that these tributes are mourning a war criminal will be met with a clucking of tongues and a "how dare you disrespect the dead," as if the civility of the discourse is somehow more important than the truth, more important than justice.
Yep, exactly. Man, this guy's awesome. Renegade Cut. Like and subscribe, folks. They do absolutely great work. I guess it's just one fellow there. Like and subscribe, please. Like and subscribe. Renegade Cut, folks. Trust me, you want this on your algorithm. You want this shit on your algorithm, I assure you. Great documentary. Thank you so much, Renegade Cut. Absolutely amazing work. Now on to so that's a recap of Henry Kissinger. Now you understand. why people like me are pissing on Henry's grave. And I fully agree with the ending there that, you know, that's the people that are tone policing and, oh, you know, it's so uncouth to be, you know, to be celebrating the death of anybody. Oh, I'm so above it. I'm so above it. No. It's okay to celebrate the death of monsters, and it's okay to, you know, to mourn the lack of justice that a monster has not received. So there you go. That's a history of Henry. That's why people are pissing on his grave. Now, I wanted to show this part because this is who is still connected through Henry. These are the people who are still proudly, you know, toting, you know, association with Henry Kissinger. The people that are participating in the, you know, the recontextualization of Henry Kissinger, similar to what, you know, what we see with George Bush. Oh, he's not so bad. Oh, you know, those crunchy hippies, they were just panties in a bunch back then. But really, you know, really he knew what was going on, and he made the right calls. They were tough calls. He made the right ones. That kind of bullshit. And yeah, R.I.P. to Mehdi Hasan's media career. I mean, as you can see here, he was like, you know, someone on Twitter said he was like an oasis in mainstream media, and I totally agree with that. You know, there's plenty of criticisms, of course, from me. You know, he didn't meet my standards. Sometimes, usually it was the omission of the critique of neoliberals, right? That's the usual. I think that was my usual critique of Mehdi Hasan. Is that, you know, he's calling out all these characters. Well, can we call out the people that are actually in power, that are literally doing nothing about the very situation we're talking about? I think that was my main concern. But really, honestly, he does amazing journalism, sourced images, articles. You know, that great interview I showed yesterday with him and the fellow from Israel. And he's like, "Oh, I've never seen that calendar. I don't even know what you're talking about. Oh, I got a picture. Let me show you. Oh, I can't understand Arabic, so it's useless to me. Well, in the picture, it's translated. Oh, well, we all make mistakes. Don't we all make mistakes, don't we, Mehdi? Oh, so you admit it's a mistake. Then why is the tweet still up?" Great journalist overall. So let's get into it here, and then we're going to get into our beefy-ass Christopher Hitchens interview. Christopher Hitchens, the trial of Henry Kissinger, you know, and this is the best we're going to get. The man's dead. This is the best we're going to get in terms of a actual legitimate, you know, human rights trial against this monster. And thank you, Christopher Hitchens, for doing the work required to make this. I mean, this is all we got. This is as close to justice as we got, was Christopher Hitchens and Henry Kissinger. So big props to an absolute titan, Christopher Hitchens, who I guarantee you would not be making apologetics for Russia's invasion. I guarantee you. Unlike Seymour Hersh.
It's Henry Kissinger's 100th birthday. Yes, the man who served as National Security Advisor and Secretary of State to two Republican presidents, Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford, the author of more than a dozen best-selling books on foreign policy and grand strategy, and a man who's been described as arguably the most famous and controversial diplomat of the 20th century, turns a century old on Saturday, May the 27th. In fact, this past Monday, Kissinger blew out the candles on his 100th birthday cake on the Economic Club of New York stage in front of an adoring audience. And remember, it's not just conservatives who worship at the altar of the Henry Kissinger. Establishment liberals, top Democrats even, have fallen over one another to associate themselves with the great Kissinger, to heap praise upon his ginormous intellect and historic achievements. Barack Obama's administration honored Kissinger with a special award. Hillary Clinton called him her friend and said she relied on his counsel. Samantha Power, the self-styled champion of humanitarian interventions, went to a baseball game with Kissinger.
I recognize that
face. And Joe
Biden,
when he was a senator, toasted Kissinger, although, to be fair, he hasn't yet invited him to the White House like all of his predecessors have done. But look, here's what I want to do to mark Kissinger's 100th birthday.
Bar is low.
I want to talk about some of the many, many people around the world who didn't get to live till 100 or even 60, 70 or 80 because of Henry Kissinger.
I don't know,
because
Snow,
of his
but if you
support
find
for
out,
brutal
let the chat
dictators,
know.
brutal regimes, brutal wars, and war crimes.
Take a
Let's
piss on
start
his
where
grave
else?
any day.
In Southeast Asia, the war in Vietnam, which Kissinger may have ridiculously won a Nobel Peace Prize for ending, but which he prolonged and escalated in the first place, including a secret and illegal expansion of that bloody war
Nobel
to
Peace
Laos
Prize,
and Cambodia. It was him.
What
Thanks
an
to a report
ironic
released by
joke.
the Department of Defense in 1973, we know that the National Security Council, headed by Henry A. Kissinger, approved each of the 3,875 Cambodia bombing raids.
You're spending your time on the internet playing apologetics for a man who got 3 to 4 million people killed. You didn't. We just went through a history of Henry Kissinger, buddy. A bit, honey. Go do literally anything else with your life. Go do literally anything else with your life, please.
In 1969 and 1970, as well as the methods for keeping them out of the newspapers. To quote Kissinger himself while instructing an all-out air assault on Cambodia, anything that flies on anything that moves. As Human Rights Watch noted in 2001, United States and South Vietnamese aerial bombings on Kissinger's watch left approximately...
Look at that. It's a quote from the book from Christopher Hitchens that we're going to watch a full video on. Yo! It's called Synergy. I meant to do that. I mean to do these things. I plan all this out. It's all intricate planning. Jesus Christ, man. Jeez. Look, getting old sucks, okay? And quite frankly, if you're 90 and you're still able to walk around and talk and, you know, you're doing good. Okay, and I'm not trying to age shame here. I know Dick Cheney. Yeah, he's a close personal enemy of mine. Him and I have a rivalry going way back.
350,000 Laotian civilians and 600,000 Cambodian civilians dead. And just this past week, The Intercept reported on the basis of U.S. military documents and eyewitness accounts from Cambodian survivors that Kissinger is responsible for more civilian deaths in Cambodia than was previously known. And yet, Kissinger has never apologized for what he did to Laos or Cambodia, instead defending those bombing campaigns as legitimate attacks on North Vietnamese forces and saying he failed to see any moral issue with them.
Pacifistic.
Still, as the late great Anthony Bourdain once wrote,
I am on the left.
What Henry did in Cambodia, the fruits of his genius for statesmanship, and you will never understand why he's not sitting in the dock at The Hague next to Milosevic.
Yo, R.I.P. to a legend.
And there's Argentina. In 1976, a coup d'etat overthrew the elected president and replaced Eva Perón with a military junta. That junta then launched what's been called the Dirty War, the hunting down of political dissidents, of socialists, trade unionists, students. And they launched it with the approval, encouragement even, of Henry Kissinger. We know this thanks to declassified documents, which the New Yorker reported on, writing, 2 days after the coup, Kissinger was briefed by his Assistant Secretary of State, who warned him, I think also we've got to expect a fair amount of repression, probably a good deal of blood in Argentina before too long. Kissinger replied, whatever chance they have, they will need a little encouragement, because I do want to encourage them.
Encourage it!
In a meeting with the Argentine foreign minister 2 months later, Kissinger advised him, in the words of the New Yorker, winkingly, quote, we are aware you are in a difficult period. We understand you must establish authority. If there are things that have to be done, you should do them quickly.
Kill.
Somewhere between 20 and 30,000 people are believed to have been arrested, tortured, and killed in Argentina's dirty war.
Me too.
As The Guardian notes, many bodies have never been found. No birthday parties for them. Then there is East Timor, which was invaded by Indonesia in December 1975, an invasion that led to the death of at least 100,000 people over the next 2 decades plus of Indonesian occupation, according to a UN-backed Truth Commission. On the eve of that invasion, literally the day before, Kissinger, alongside President Ford, met with Indonesian dictator General Suharto and basically gave him the green light to invade. To quote Kissinger's advice to Suharto from a declassified document, it is important that whatever you do succeeds quickly, but that it would be better if it were done after we returned to the United States.
He understood that there's
then there's East
certain
Pakistan,
amount of time
now Bangladesh, which was
with
attacked by a military-ruled West Pakistan, now just Pakistan, in 1971, a conflict that killed hundreds of thousands of Bengalis and displaced millions. And yet, as Princeton professor Gary Bass has shown, based on declassified documents and White House tapes, Kissinger stood stoutly behind Pakistan's generals, supporting the murderous regime at many of the most crucial moments.
Of course he did.
And when a U.S. diplomat on the ground in what was then East Pakistan sent a cable to Washington warning of a genocide, Kissinger called the man a maniac and had him dismissed from his post. I could go on and on and on, sadly. I didn't even get to Chile and Kissinger's support for General Pinochet's coup there, or his betrayal of Iraq's Kurds. Kissinger, of course, has for years denied any criminal culpability for any of this. But he did cancel a trip to South America in 2002 after Chile opened a probe into the Pinochet coup. As human rights lawyer Bruce Broomhall told the New York Times back then, quote, "I think it's clear that Kissinger is now one of many, many officials who have to think twice before they travel."
Not really.
As historian Greg Grandin of Yale has argued, a full tally hasn't been done, but a back-of-the-envelope count would attribute 3, maybe 4 million deaths to Kissinger's actions.
No biggie.
So where is the accountability? The reckoning? Where is justice, dare I ask? In his 2001 book, The Trial of Henry Kissinger, the late Christopher Hitchens called for Kissinger to be prosecuted for war crimes, for crimes against humanity, and for offences against common or customary or international law, including conspiracy to commit murder, kidnap, and torture. And yet Kissinger this week celebrates his landmark 100th birthday with not an arrest warrant or war crimes tribunal in sight.
Hey, I killed 4 million people.
Congratulations, Henry. Pat yourself on the back for living such a long life, and as a free man, too. It's a shame so many millions of victims of your policies can't say the same.
Yeah, we got to get this guy off the air, guys. Stat. Let's go. Mehdi Hasan. I can see why he was fired, huh? No, for real. Mehdi Hasan, great report. There it is, folks. I'm not going to like the MSNBC, man. Fuck you, MSNBC. Fuck you. Don't I have, like... How come I don't have, like, a fuck you song? I have the sex offender shuffle. That doesn't make any sense. Well, MSNBC sucks. They're not sex offenders. All right, folks, so here is the meat and potatoes of the stream, the trial of Henry Kissinger, as told by the man, the myth, the legend, Christopher Hitchens. Christopher Hitchens. Woo! Christopher Hitchens. Folks, this might be, the format might be a little bit dry. But I don't know. Make some coffee. Put me in the background. I'm going to do my best to not pause it. I'm going to 5 pauses. This is an hour-long video. I get 5 pauses. I'm going to try to use them the best I can. But we're going to try and keep this flowing so it's not, you know, bothering the shit out. Because it's got to be just unwatchable. Every 5 fucking seconds, I'm pausing the video. Adding my stupid commentary. Unbelievable. All right, so let's get into it. Let's not waste any more time. It's Christopher Hitchens, baby.
Talks about an hour and 15 minutes.
C-SPAN 3. Woo! C-SPAN 3. Let's see Hasan sit through an hour C-SPAN 3 video. Real news on the News Underground, bitch. Real news.
Unacknowledged legislation.
Oh my God, it's so quiet.
Christopher also writes for Vanity Fair and The Nation. Please join me in welcoming Christopher Hitchens.
Woo, bitch! Woo! Let's calm down.
Thank you. I know it's Sherry. I just was pausing. I was pausing with exquisite gallantry. Thank you, Sherry, for that kind introduction. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming. It's kind of sad that on a beautiful evening like this, there are so many Bostonians with nothing better to do. But on the other hand, it's kind of flattering that this number of you would prefer me to the Red Sox. As Sherry mentioned, I'm out on the road with a smile and a shoe shine, being a salesman for 2 books, including my collection of essays on literature and poetry. And
He's so
I was
awesome.
recently in that capacity at Beloit College in Wisconsin. I don't know if any of you have ever been there. It's excellent. There's always somebody. It's a great college, and has a very, very good English department, and furthermore, they give you a really serious dinner beforehand at the Gun Club, where I was asked, would I be able, in talking to the English department students, to mention my book on unacknowledged legislation in the same breath as Henry Kissinger? In other words, could I mention him and Shelley in the same breath? Since, as some of you will already have guessed, the title of the first book is a straight lift from Shelley's essay in defense of poetry. And I thought, no, I don't think I can do that. I probably shouldn't even think about it. There's something profane in the suggestion. But then I did think about it. The invitation seemed like a challenge, and I thought, of course I can. And not only that, I should. And indeed, I cursed myself because this could have gone in the introduction to both books and made both of them better. It's this. It's only a couple of degrees of separation. Before he became the magnificent mammal that we all know today, Henry Kissinger was a fairly average member of the pseudo-intellectual think tank academic community. And in that capacity, he wrote a couple of undistinguished books, one of them on the problem of nuclear warfare, which he wrote for the Rockefeller family. The problem with nuclear weapons, he said, was how unusable they were. The solution would be to make them more usable. This is the origin of the term tactical nuclear weapon, the stupidest apposition of words, I think, until nuclear umbrella made its appearance. And a second book called A World Restored, which is a paean or hymn to the short-lived, oppressive, reactionary political settlement imposed on Europe in the aftermath of the Battle of Waterloo and the Congress of Vienna. It's associated with the names of Prince Metternich, of Lord Castlereagh, and of other reactionary politicians of the time who tried to define European stability as a polity that excluded the inconvenient peoples of, say, Poland, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and of course the Jews, and of course the Americans. Anyway, that's one of the reasons it didn't last very long. And the leading opposition to this was supplied by the poets of the day, notably Byron and Shelley. Shelley had a particular dislike for Henry Kissinger's great object of admiration, Castlereagh. And Shelley, having written a number of poems, wrongly in my view called romantic, against this terrible regime, began a poem with the lines, "I met murder on the way, he had a face like Castlereagh." So there you see it can be done. And bear the lines in mind, and think of this face. I don't know how many of you can see it. This face, ladies and gentlemen. Probably a lot of you are old enough to remember times when it's been told to you as voters and taxpayers that some atrocious course of action is necessary in some obscure corner of the world in order that face not be lost, or in order that face be saved. I have to ask you again to consider how many of you would agree to have somebody bombed or tortured or murdered or disappeared or assassinated to save this face, or that of his equally beautiful patron and friend Richard Nixon, another face which I won't need to hold up to recall to your minds, because the invitation I'm making to you is a serious one, morally serious one. In point of fact, many thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of people, good people, people better than this man, people better than his boss, were put to death to save those faces. And I'm here to make the case for the prosecution of those deeds. And I suppose I'm encouraged at the thought that obviously I'm pushing at an open door with some of you, but believe me, I'm willing to push on a closed one too. We have a time constraint this evening. I have 20 minutes. I will be prepared in question time and later on the pavement, if need be, to materialize everything I say. I will make no assertion I can't document or support or back up. And I'll begin like this. Damn. Who of you could honestly raise their hand and say that they recently heard the expression peaceful, orderly, democratic transition of power? I see. That's all? Has no one else recently heard the expression peaceful, orderly, democratic transition of power? Is it fading so soon? I thought that there was a time, doesn't seem very long ago, when you couldn't turn on the radio or the TV without being assured that that's what you were having. You were having a peaceful, orderly, democratic transition of power. Some of you may even have thought, if we're having such a peaceful, orderly, democratic transition of power, why do we keep on having to be assured that we are having a peaceful, democratic... If they go on telling us we're having a peaceful, orderly, democratic transition of power, one might begin to doubt that one is, in fact, having a peaceful, orderly, democratic transition of power. But for all that cynicism, it's no mean thing to be able to say that you live in a society where that is true, where it's you who determine who the government is, and no one is allowed to interfere in that choice. So I'm going to start with the election of 1968, the summer of 1968, when two things were evident. One, it had been concluded by a majority of the American political establishment and by, I would say, a pretty large majority of the American people, that the war in Indochina was, at the very best, a terrible mistake and should be brought to an end as soon as possible. There was a large minority, of which I was one, who thought it was much worse than a mistake, that it was a horrendous crime. But there was a big consensus to wind it down. This consensus, by the way, included Dr. Henry Kissinger, as he then was. But a second thing was happening, which was that the Richard Nixon campaign knew that this was Nixon's last chance to become president. And they evolved the following plan. That
Treasonous.
they would go to the South Vietnamese military junta
You're right back.
in Saigon, led by General Thieu, and they would say to them, they had to do this privately and covertly because it was illegal and treasonous to do it, they would say to them that if they, the South Vietnamese, would withdraw from the peace negotiations that the US government was then sponsoring in Paris, and would time that withdrawal for the eve of the election, that the incoming Nixon administration would give them a better deal, would give the South Vietnamese a better return. The people who did that, Richard Nixon, Spiro Agnew, John Mitchell, have since been exposed for having done it. I have the entire story in my book. This used to be a speculation, a hypothesis in Washington, but then so did the theory that the Gulf of Tonkin resolution was fraud. This story has now moved to the point where it's part of the official record. We actually now possess the FBI transcripts of the bugging to which President Johnson subjected the Nixon campaign while it was doing this atrocious covert action. I mentioned the name Nixon, Agnew, Mitchell. There was a fourth man, Henry Kissinger, who was attached to the negotiations in Paris in his capacity as a liberal Republican. And he was the one who, from Paris, secretly revealed the US government's negotiating positions through a back channel to Richard Nixon. So that in Mr. Nixon's subversion of the election,
That sounds
and of
interesting,
the
Woke
peace
Patriot.
negotiations, he always had perfect knowledge from informers. And on the 3rd of November 1968, the South Vietnamese did pull out of the Paris peace talks, bringing them to a halt, sabotaging them completely, and destroying the peace plank of the Democrats' re-election campaign. And Richard Nixon duly became a president, and on his first day in office, and on the second time only he'd met him, and the first time he'd ever met him alone, invited Henry Kissinger to be his national security advisor.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And Mr. Nixon did not like Jews. He didn't like academics, even pseudo-academics.
Neither did Kissinger.
Even pseudo-intellectuals. He didn't like the East Coast universities. Didn't like the type at all, but he knew talent when he saw it. And a star was born, and a one-man international rolling crime wave began. And the beginning of it was this: the illegal mortgage on another 4 years of the Indochina War that had been taken out without the knowledge of the American people, because not even the Johnson administration dared share what it knew.
Remember, Congress didn't even know until
That
the
illegal
70s.
mortgage had to be paid off, and it was paid off, with 4 to 5 years more of the war, and not just of a war in Vietnam that was already a war of aggression and atrocity, but by extending and deepening that war, expanding it to Cambodia and to Laos, and to heavy further continued bombardment of North Vietnam. And of the names that appear on the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, my hometown, very nearly half, some 22,000, were incised in stone on dates after the inauguration of the Nixon-Kissinger team. And we would not have the resources to build a wall big enough on which to inscribe the names of the Vietnamese, Cambodians, and Laotians who were killed in that time. I often think we don't even want to know how many there were. And there would be no way, there still is no way of computing the incredible damage done to the ecology and economy and society of those peoples.
Yeah.
And that was how the Nixon-Kissinger adventure began. And that's the first item in my bill of indictment. And if you
Ability and diamonds.
combine the two elements of this, the sabotage, the deliberate sabotage of an American presidential election, and the sabotage and subversion of the ongoing Paris peace negotiations on Indochina into one single act, which they do form one single action, I say it's the wickedest thing ever done in American political history.
Yet.
So far had no challenger to say that this has a rival for that. But I should pause, but not for long, to let that sink in. I'm pressed for time. I can move on to another peaceful, democratic, orderly transition of power, if you like. Not long after this, the people of Chile had an election. The Chilean people were very proud of the fact that they had a peaceful, orderly, democratic transition of power in their country. They had a tradition of it. They were the envy of their neighbors in Brazil and Uruguay and Paraguay and Argentina.
Can't have that.
For that very reason. The army had never intervened in a Chilean election before. They were rightly proud of this. But in the year 1970, the wrong party won that election. The wrong candidate won it from the point of view of Mr. Nixon and Mr. Kissinger. And it was decided to find and finance and arm and induce some Chilean officers who would break that tradition and would bring the army into politics and elect a government that Mr. Nixon and Mr. Kissinger would like better. Or, I said elect, I'm so sorry, impose such a government. There was an obstacle to that plan. There were several obstacles, as well as Chile's long tradition. There was an individual named General René Schneider. He was the head of the Chilean Armed Forces. He was a decent conservative officer with a constitutional cast of mind. He had taken his oath to the Chilean Constitution, was not prepared to break it. And therefore, it became necessary to make General René Schneider go away, have him removed from the scene. And I have in my book the transcripts of the meetings at which Henry Kissinger, in the chair, arranged for the murder of General Schneider, arranged for the murderers to be found. They chose a gang of experienced men of violence, people with renowned records for violence and political extremism, fascists, actually, to give them their proper name. They sent them money through the American diplomatic bag and sophisticated weaponry through the American diplomatic bag of Santiago in order that the execution could take place. Libya gets bombed, by the way, if it uses its diplomatic bag for purposes like that.
Yeah.
And in due time, the general was shot down in the street. And now we know, we've only known this since last December, when on the initiative of Congressman Morris Hinchy of New York, all the documents were finally revealed to Congress, that the murderers were then paid off with a very large sum of American cash money supplied by Henry Kissinger, and were helped to conceal the evidence of their crime. And this was
now
the
we're
opening,
more slick about
this
this
assassination,
shit.
this murder. And when you
We're
read
less direct.
the transcript of the discussions and the planning and the
Plausible
organizing, it's
deniability
like
and
listening to
multiple
the John Gotti
layers.
tapes. It's not like The Sopranos at all. It's a cold-blooded, wet job. It's a hit. It's a whack.
No wet work.
Done by this man, this individual, this person.
A whack.
You realize it's only also the prelude to the assassination of Chilean democracy itself, because within 3 years, tactics like that, repeatedly applied, of sabotage, murder, terror, and assassination, had produced a military coup which asphyxiated democracy in Chile for nearly a quarter of a century. But the Chilean people are back now, and they are instituting inquiries into what happened to them and to their chosen leaders and to their society. And as a result of this, on Memorial Day this year, I'm talking about 3 or 4 Mondays ago, in the Ritz Hotel in Paris, Henry Kissinger was hit with a summons by a French judge, Judge Roger Leloir, who is investigating the disappearance of 5 French citizens who fell victim to General Pinochet's death squads. And Mr. Kissinger, I wish I had been there for this, I'm bound to say. Mr. Kissinger had the summons read to him in translation by the manager of the Ritz Hotel, saw that it required his presence at the Palais de Justice the following day, and ran out of town. Okay? You haven't read it in the New York Times yet because it's not the sort of news that's fit to print. But you will. It isn't in the Washington Post either. It isn't in the Los Angeles Times. It hasn't been on any network. But it is true, and you can look it up. Mr. Kissinger has also been hit with a summons by the judge in the Pinochet case in Chile to answer questions again about Operation Condor, the internationalization of the death squads of South America into a continental-sized weapon of disappearance, torture, kidnap, and repression of dissent, and also by Judge Rodolfo Corral in Argentina, who's pursuing similar inquiries. In other words, one of the best-known graduates of a school not far from where we're sitting, in your case, is now wanted for questioning in 3 democracies on 2 continents and is refusing to answer the questions. That's the state of affairs now.
Not bad.
I consider it an occasion for making a little holiday in my heart. But I call it...
Not great.
And again, I'm glad that you concur, but why did I say a little holiday? Why not a big holiday?
Yeah.
Because isn't it an absolute disgrace? Is it not a shame that everyone here should feel that the pursuit of justice in this matter is being left to impoverished victims in other countries who've already had their family members tortured to death.
Yeah, great
They
point.
are expected to scrape together the resources to hope to get a hearing somewhere in the United States, where this man lives as an honored citizen in Midtown Manhattan,
Yeah.
and rubs shoulders with the white trash of New York society, and is the independent, detached, impartial news consultant for ABC, and has a column syndicated by the Los Angeles Times, even into my hometown rag, the Washington Post. And there's no one in the United States who's prepared to serve a summons on this man. There's no one in Congress to say it's our responsibility to seek justice here. Does the United States not go around the world insisting on the speedy delivery
Yes.
of other war criminals
Yes,
to instant justice? Aren't we indeed
Brutal
delighted
irony.
to see that Mr. Milosevic was finally collared today? I certainly am. But we do not talk to our own society in the language, the peremptory terms we quite rightly employ with Serbian fascists, or with Rwandans, or indeed with Germans, or Brazilians. We tell them, no, you must face your history. You must face it openly and honestly. You must open the archives. You must bring your criminals to justice. You must have, in other words,
That's what
a
we
truth
tell
and
them.
reconciliation, or truth and justice, I would prefer, commission. And that's what we need here, and have needed for some time. And Exhibit A is my subject, Henry Kissinger. And it is an appalling thing that only the victims are so far pursuing the justice that is their right for crimes committed against them by us, or by people acting, at any rate, in our name. Though I suppose it could be said, to flatter you a little, ladies and gentlemen, that at least this regime never dared tell you the truth. At least they felt they had to lie to you about it. But that's why this campaign is also one for historic truth and for open government.
Bar is so low.
Justice. In other words, it's high time it was taken out of my poor hands. The stakes in this are very, very high indeed. Would you like some more orderly, democratic, peaceful transitions of power?
Yes,
before I
please.
Close. Or
Yes,
before I
Daddy.
pause, at any rate? All right. Next year sometime, I think I have time for one more, do I? Next year sometime, I devoutly hope and believe, the people of East Timor will
mic
have
mixing
an
changed.
election which will simultaneously make them an independent country and a democracy. That'll mean they'll be having this, the few of them who remain. It's been very hard to find even a pulse in East Timorese society in the last few years after decades of massacre and famine and repression. But Indonesia has now evacuated the territory. Now they are having an independence election, and they're being shepherded to independence under UN aegis. Well, all those last three things were supposed to happen in 1975. They've been waiting a long time for this peaceful, orderly, democratic transition of power. In 1975, when the Portuguese colonial authorities began to evacuate East Timor, it became an international responsibility of Portugal and the UN to shepherd the people of East Timor to independence and to democracy. But the Indonesian dictatorship, the nearby dictatorship, had another plan. They thought it would be better if Indonesia occupied and annexed the people and territory of East Timor. I say the people and territory of East Timor in point of fact, to be blunt about it, and the record supports this. The Indonesian generals thought they'd rather have the territory and not the people, since the people were not Indonesian, and since they were actually, as it happens, a religious minority. They're mainly Catholic. So they evolved a plan whereby they took the land and they subjected the people to a campaign of genocide. That's been amply and substantially documented, and I don't need to prove it to anybody, I know. But what isn't as widely known as it could be, or should be, is that on the day they took that decision, Henry Kissinger was sitting in the room with the Indonesian general staff and approved in advance and gave the go-ahead and green light for that invasion. And in the subsequent campaign of massacre, food denial, the use of famine as a political weapon, and so on, made sure that the Indonesian armed forces never ran out of money and was prepared and did in fact break American law in order to do so, because the Foreign Assistance Act, among other things, prohibits the use of American weaponry for any purpose other than self-defense, and the Indonesians never even claimed that they were defending themselves against the tiny population or state of East Timor. And I have all the documents in my book of how Kissinger knowingly encouraged this course of action, violently broke international law in the illegal annexation of East Timor, ignored the Genocide Convention, and broke American law in order to make sure that the butchers became aware that they need never fear a shortage of weaponry to complete the task. And upon leaving office a short while afterwards, was rewarded with a half share in a very large gold mine run by the Indonesian military dictatorship, of which he remains a director, as he has and remains a director of a number of other military corporate consortia in Indonesia, and in fact has made a second career out of franchising contacts between despotisms and the corporations who like them. It's called Kissinger Associates. It's a very well-respected firm in Midtown Manhattan as well, and it gets in many consultancies and spaces on the op-ed page. That was what the language of peaceful, democratic, orderly transition meant to the people of East Timor, and there's no one to speak for them, and it would be a very sad day for them if that job was left to me, quite clearly. So I think I can hold it there.
Trying to get the volume right on this.
Questions. As I say, I'm prepared to defend every assertion that I've made, but I suppose if I look for a means of closing decisively, I would say that I hope that you yourselves might decide to enlist in this campaign. You have rights in this matter too, and the United States, this republic, is now at a stage where it cannot simultaneously lecture the rest of the world upon the universal application of standards of human rights and of political justice, and continue to flout and defame and disfigure these same values by harboring this man or by refusing to admit what was done to save this face. Thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. So concise too. So now we're going to do a really lengthy question and answer segment. So this is going to be juicy.
Thank you again. I'm at your service now. It might perhaps be thought invidious if I pointed to questioners, in that I might, for all you know, have brought members of my family or... So would someone else like, would you perhaps point to recognized questioners?
How about way in the back in the green shirt?
Just your luck.
Sorry about that.
No, life, he's young enough to find out life is unfair.
I like to start from the back.
Huh?
I like to start from the back.
Yeah, sure.
He's so witty. He's so snappy. Damn, dude. Get the mic up there, Junior. Let's go.
Yes, a very good question. Was it heard by all?
No.
Okay, I'm sorry, I have to ventriloquize your question, sir. I was asked, why did the Johnson administration not reveal what it had learned by the bugging of the Nixon campaign in 1968?
No, say it isn't so, Rickaby.
It's a hotly disputed question, still among the people who are around who remember it. I mean, like Richard Holbrooke.
All right, I'm sorry. What was the question?
Campaign. Okay, I'm sorry, I have to ventriloquize your question, sir. I was asked, why did the Johnson administration not reveal what it had learned by the bugging of the Nixon campaign in 1968?
Great question.
Well, it's a hotly disputed question, still among the people who are around who remember it. I mean, like Richard Holbrooke, for example, who's a member of that delegation, who's still very outraged about what happened. The best clue, I think, is in the memoirs of Clark Clifford, who was Johnson's right-hand man at the time, and wrote one of the first published accounts of the thing, though we didn't then have the FBI transcript.
What in the fuck? What in the fuck?
Didn't want to admit that he'd been bugging the other candidate's plane. That's one thing. The other thing, but I think it weighed even more with people like Clifford and also with Hubert Humphrey, who feared two things. One, it could look like dirty pool on his part, but two, you have to remember, that year, a large number of citizens had in effect seen through the government. I mean, there was I remember it, myself and some of you younger people will have read about it. There were riots in the streets and on campuses. There was the feeling that not just an appalling thing had been done to the people of Indochina, but a terrific rape of the American Constitution had taken place, that Congress had been lied to, that the system was breaking down. Well, if they knew what the Nixon gang was up to and had been doing, and how easy it was to continue to make end runs around democracy, what might have been the harvest? In my opinion, this, by the way, will hold true in all cases. What unites both major parties is much larger than what, greater and tighter than what divides them. What would have been at stake here was the survival of the consensus itself, and they weren't going to make a move that would have done that. But Nixon did later try, when he himself was caught bugging the Democrat headquarters, did try to use it as blackmail to prevent the release of the tapes. But it didn't work, because he was then told by Johnson and his heirs, if you do that, we will tell the American people what we were bugging you for. And that's in the Haldeman diaries. And that is, in my opinion, one of the reasons why Henry Kissinger urged Richard Nixon to burn the tapes rather than surrender them under subpoena. Remember what this guy has done to your country as well as other people's. Bear that in mind. You have a reckoning with him too.
Damn.
How about right to your...
He's like a knife to the throat of authoritarian empire.
Responded to you somewhat. Among the things he has said about you is that you are a Holocaust denier, which you are not apparently. Could you speculate as to where he got this idea and tell us why it is that you have threatened lawsuits against Kissinger for his remarks? I always thought you had been a defender of free speech to the max, in the mode of a Noam Chomsky, for example.
To be sure.
Who defends vicious lies as free speech, to his credit. Why aren't you in the same camp as Mr. Chomsky?
Well,
there's a fucking difference between free speech and libel.
It would be impertinent of me ever to put myself in the same category as the Duke of Lexington, but I perfectly understand the grammar of your question. Here's my reply. You're kind to say that apparently, or in other words, I don't appear to be someone who doubts the occurrence of the Holocaust. I could secretly be one. I mean, there's no way I could. But there's no reason for anyone to say that I am. And those who do say it at their peril, because it is a very gross defamation, and it's also an attempt to change the subject away from the question Mr. Kissinger was asked, which was what is your response to Mr. Hitchens's allegations? That's the first mistake he made, was to make it too obvious he was trying to change the subject and to change it in a hysterical way. The second is he pissed me off. And I am going to sue him because I want this question cleared up, because it's been brought up against me by some other crankish and cultish people who object to me in general, but think that I've made a mistake in defending the First Amendment rights of David Irving, the historian, which I have done and continue to do. And so to your closing point, I'm a First Amendment absolutist, of course. I don't want Kissinger to stop saying it, and I have no means of imposing prior restraint on him. He can carry on saying it, for all I care, as he does all his other lies. But I point out to you that in the discovery stage of a libel action, it will be possible for me to show that he is a habitual, pathological, consistent liar. And I will bring the evidence into court that shows that. That's why he's made such a big mistake. And I will say when it's over, he can go on saying that he didn't know anything about East Timor. He can go on saying he didn't know what was happening in Cambodia. I can't stop him doing that, but we will have established, and he'll have had to pay for the fact that these are lies. So it's a blunder that he's made, because he can be deposed under discovery. And that's what I'm considering doing to him. It'd be long and arduous and expensive, but it seems to me that it's an opportunity that ought not to be missed.
I'm not sure what happened to this whole lawsuit.
His right to express himself, I'm afraid, isn't something I would want to qualify, but in any case, I can't.
Okay, gentleman in black right here.
Interesting.
Claims, but why? Can you explain why the particular interest in Kissinger and events since 1968? My impression, as a non-historian, is that this has been going on from the beginning of this country. And I was amazed to learn something that you probably understand, that in 1778, George Washington ordered what can only be called ethnic cleansing of Indians in the Binghamton area. I was there a few months ago, and they are trying to build a Holocaust memorial and I looked up the documents in the library, and in Washington's biography, he actually sends to his General Sheridan, or whoever it is, or Sullivan, an order to clean out the Indians because they're interfering with the war effort, and he did. Now, why suddenly an interest in Kissinger and events since 1968.
Was the question heard audible? Yes. Well, I'm going to tread carefully and not be accused of denying the Iroquois Holocaust. But I think the question must have become obvious, the answer must have become obvious to you even as you were speaking. There's no way of putting George Washington on trial. Okay? That must have struck you. Okay?
True, it's pretty true.
Just as the German
I say that
people
it's
were on trial.
well, I don't think it's possible to put the American people on trial. I think it's possible to say that though the huge attempts are made to distract people from the fact, and people are willing to be distracted from it, that this does represent something of a moral crisis and a political crisis for the American society, yes, and in real time. Now, if you'd said, well, what about Robert McNamara, for example, I'd say, well, that's a good point. Kissinger was in many ways the executive of others in doing this, but I think there are two things. One, partly because of the criminal way in which it was originally conceived, the Nixon administration imploded, and in the last 2 or 3 years of it, Henry Kissinger was in effect the president, at any rate for foreign and defense and security, national security purposes. And as a result, we know more about what he did, and he was able to do so much in what I call his international one-man rolling crime wave, that there's enough evidence for a French judge to issue a summons. In other words, that the statement Henry Kissinger is a war criminal is a statement I've been making, and I dare say you have, for many years. It's now not a piece of rhetoric. Okay, it's not a metaphor. It's a job description.
Yeah.
And it might feature on an indictment. So I decided to write this book, which I could have written in a different form, and give it this title.
And why it's really important too, because a precedent set with Henry Kissinger could have been applied to George Bush, could have been applied to Barack Obama. Barack Obama might have thought twice about his drone bomb campaign had Henry Kissinger received some kind of legitimate punishment for being a war criminal, some kind of conviction in The Hague, and actually, being put behind bars. I mean, it seems so crazy, and and the further away we get from that accountability, the less likely it will become.
Instead of another, and this shape instead of another, as a consequence of the arrest of General Pinochet and the prosecution of Slobodan Milosevic, because we now live in a world where, in fact, it is possible that universal jurisdiction will become the principle of courts in democratic countries, universal jurisdiction over war criminals, and sovereign immunity will cease to be a defense. In other words, you won't be able to say, yes, I did kill all those Chileans, but I was hoping to impress Richard Nixon. Now, until recently, that would have been a defense. Not great, but it would have been one. Now, the British House of Lords now says that won't work. Do you want to live in a society that has less respect for the rule of law and democracy than the British House of Lords? I would, if I was you, sir, and I say this with all respect, I'd concentrate on that rather than on 1778. I really would.
Trial for bombing Belgrade.
Clinton, in my view, could not be put on trial for bombing Belgrade. But Mr. Clinton, in my view, could not be put on trial for bombing Belgrade, but he could be put on trial for bombing Khartoum.
Okay, let's start over here.
Man, he's so knowledgeable. He's so on top of it. Only the good die young.
Cyprus, and I would like you to say something about this issue, because Cyprus is is waiting for justice for 27 years now. So would you please?
Yes, by all means. The lady asks me if I would say a bit about the Cyprus question, about which I have a chapter in this book, and I'm happy to do so, and I'm sorry I didn't have time in the opening stages. It's another peaceful, democratic, orderly transition, as a matter of fact. Cyprus, but in this case from democracy to dictatorship, and not peaceful and not orderly. It's another transition, though. The island of Cyprus, which had been independent, former British colony, predominantly Greek in ethnicity and language and religion, since 1960, was the envy of the military dictatorship which, with American connivance, governed Greece from 1967. The Greek military dictatorship wanted to annex the island of Cyprus by force. And because Greece was a dictatorship and Cyprus was a democracy led by President Makarios, who was steadily and regularly re-elected by his people, Henry Kissinger naturally preferred the dictators to the Democrat, and gave support to their plan to assassinate President Makarios as a prelude to the full-scale military coup and military takeover of the island, which I can't tell you the whole story in anything but a much longer time, but which triggered 2 Turkish invasions of the island and culminated in the situation we have today, an artificial partition imposed by NATO by force on a democratic people, a democratic island which can't threaten and never has threatened anybody else, solely because its political independence posed a threat to neighboring military dictatorships.
Wow, I wonder what's happening in Cyprus right now.
Stage of the plan to murder Makarios and to do this to the people of Cyprus, and I've told the story in a book I wrote some years ago about the subject. It's actually how I first got interested in him. And with more and fresher documents that have come to light, making it even more horrifyingly clear since in this book. So I'm very happy to take up the lady's invitation and to urge you not to forget that still, to this day, in Cyprus, people are paying in the form of 200,000 refugees, many hundreds of missing and disappeared people, and a military occupation and an arms race and the threat of another war, still to this day paying a very heavy price for Henry Kissinger's diplomacy, which, as ever, relied on the forces of fascism.
And this guy fucked up everything he touched.
I dare say you or the forces of justice may have Kissinger a little bit on the run in this country as well, judging from the fact that just two days ago he canceled an appearance that was to have taken place in the same series. And no one is quite sure why, I don't think, but I have my suspicions. My question is, and I don't know if you write about it in your book, but when Kissinger was at Harvard, he had the habit of writing letters to the local office of the FBI, at least some of this is a matter of public record, informing, quote unquote, on supposedly suspicious colleagues. And I wonder if you're aware of this propensity that Kissinger showed before he became better known, and if you could talk about perhaps what this may have presaged in terms of Kissinger's later behavior.
Well, to the first observation, this is the second time I've been to one of his hometowns and failed to meet him. I was invited by a group of people in Washington, Connecticut, where he lives, to come, people I didn't know, but when they heard that he was to be made the luminary of the local library in a ceremony, they invited me to give a reading at the Hickory Stick bookstore across the green. And I said yes, and Kissinger pulled back. He went back inside his compound and wouldn't come out to play. In fact, that left the library committee. Washington, Connecticut's full of weekend New Yorkers who like a bit of culture, and they like to raise funds and have dinners, but they were left without a luminary for the dinner, so they asked me, since there wasn't another visiting author on the scene. And at first I thought, I'm not going to sit in the chair that was reserved for that swine, but then I thought it would be pompous. So I ate his dinner.
This guy.
And I must say, I candidly don't believe that a man like this with a publisher like Simon & Schuster would put the Harvard Bookstore to all the trouble of booking the Charles Hotel, giving out tickets, making publicity, and to discover at such short notice that he had a scheduling conflict. I'm sorry, I don't believe it. It's too rude a claim, it's too crude a claim to make to be believed, even from such a man. And I do also know that at the National Press Club last week, he made it a condition of his appearance that no questions about my book be asked. And I'm sorry to say, got the chairman to agree to this, but there's a row about that now. But as I say, it's about time it stopped being just me. Fun though this is, and I'm sure we will one day meet. That he was a rat and a snitch doesn't surprise me in the least. I didn't know it. It wouldn't make much difference either to my book, because this book, you'll see, is reassuringly cheap and quite short. If its title was Vile Things You Should Know About Henry Kissinger, I decided not to do that precisely because I don't know when I'd have got through that. There's an enormous, I even say, I give a list of 8 atrocities in the beginning of the book that I decided not to deal with because, revolting though they are, what was done in Kurdistan by Kissinger, for example, what was done with the Shah of Iran by Kissinger, what was done in Lebanon by Kissinger, what was done during Watergate by Kissinger, all these things. None of them, unfortunately, met my standard of Pinochet Milosevic.
Sure.
And that's the bar I've set, and my last chapter, I'm proud to say, has been proved right. I said there would be people proceeding against him in other countries, seeking justice under the new precedents, and there have already been 3, and I can promise you there will be more. He's never, I make you this promise, he's never going to hear the end of this. From now till the day he dies, he's going to be haunted and harried by this.
Gentleman in the blue shirt, the second row. Just wait till the microphone gets to you.
Is that mic supposed to be working? I like her hat. Very
I
nice.
actually have a question on exactly that topic, which is where do you think we might see him brought to justice? Perhaps Belgium or France, or I'm just curious as to where you think he might actually face a trial.
Well, I know, and I say in my book, and I have a tape of him having a very anxious conversation with his publisher about
Yes,
where he's able to
Davey.
travel now.
You
he
living
doesn't
under a
travel without
rock?
taking legal advice. And obviously, it isn't always that good, the advice, because he was obviously told he would be safe to go to France for Memorial Day, and he wasn't. And that summons remains active, by the way. He can't go back to Paris without triggering it again. And I don't think he had any plans to go on a holiday in Chile, frankly. Or in Spain or Argentina or
You
East Timor
continue
or
to
Cyprus
confuse
or
me,
Bangladesh
Davey.
or Cambodia. So there are obviously other ways in which jurisdictions don't apply. But here's what I think should happen. When Richard Nixon was about to be impeached, the first article of impeachment drawn up was for the illegal bombing of Cambodia. People forget this, but that was the original article of impeachment, for making war, levying war illegally without the knowledge or consent of Congress. And as we also all know, it was decided by a long process of log rolling in Congress and elsewhere that you, the American people, couldn't stand the trauma of an impeachment or a full-blown trial, would rather have a quiet life, and on the whole it would be better to have a pardon for the president, and the deal was, this would put the Vietnam syndrome behind us and the healing process can begin, and you know how all this goes.
Look forward,
this is the only
not
culture in
behind,
history
as
of the
Obama
world
said.
where the expression, your history, is an insult. And we're always ceaselessly enjoined to develop more amnesia. Let's move on. Let's put this behind us.
So true.
Well, it didn't work, did it? The president of the college where I teach in New York, the former Senator Kerry, has just found that, yeah, maybe he did take a knife to the throats of 5 children and 2 grandparents in the dark in the Mekong Delta, about 5 weeks after Nixon was inaugurated, oddly enough. A prominent local historian I see can't get his story straight either about that period. There's no burying the Vietnam syndrome, take it from me. Not while any of us is alive who remembers it anyway. So we should go back and restart the trial. It seems to me Congress should become seized of the matter, admit that the attempt to bury that epoch was a failure, and convene hearings and decide to let the chips fall where they may, make it up to the victims as far as is possible, and punish the guilty. If that can't be done, there's no way this country can face the rest of the world, it seems to me. Just no way at all.
No one even bothers applauding because they know it's so
Thank you very much for
unrealistic,
coming.
really.
Sorry, the mic is going all around. Your point about America taking responsibility for Kissinger is well taken. I'm an active member in the movement to bring the actions of George Bush and the Supreme Court to light, and was wondering what, or more specifically, what names of individuals that we as Americans can write to or call or whomever to help. Henry Kissinger is a stain. His actions are a stain on all of us, and what we as Americans can do to bring him to justice here in this country. It's great that he's being chased in France and Chile and elsewhere, but we should do it here. And
yes, good for you. Well, what I hope...
Do you agree, though, Davey, that it should happen? Would you disagree with a politician or someone in power who said it should happen?
Will happen shortly is that a large number of individuals and also human rights organizations will publish some kind of statement saying that, because I forgot to add, the Bush administration takes the view that Henry Kissinger doesn't have to answer these summonses. The judge in Paris, Judge Leloir, was told by the American embassy to write to Washington, to the State Department, if he wanted information about the missing French people in Chile. And his reply, I thought it was a very good one, was to say he'd already done
The
that.
U.S. included, Davey?
And received no reply. He wrote in the Clinton years. They didn't even give him a reply. So that's why he wanted to summons them. At present, it is the view of the U.S. government. Henry Kissinger doesn't have to answer the questions. And it's also the view of the American mass media.
Thank you, Davey.
That it doesn't meet the definition of news, that he's being asked. Well, there are things you can do about both those things, it seems to me. A way to start would be, we as Americans think it's a disgrace that Henry Kissinger is sheltered by the U.S. government from magistrates in 3 democracies who have questions that only he can answer. It's only a small thing, but believe you me, he dreads it. And he won't make a public appearance where he thinks he'll be asked that question.
True, it's true.
Otherwise, why would he have had David Gergen going to question him the other day? I'm serious. I mean, he's terrified of that question and its implications. And so for a relatively small concentration of effort, and after all, it's something very easy to explain to anybody and very easily intelligible, you get, I promise you, a very big return. But finally, it does seem to me it's the responsibility of Congress, as has been shouldered by the Congresses of every other democratic country that's been through a period of being a rogue state or an illegitimate regime, and both those things apply to the Nixon-Kissinger gang. Look, Nixon copped a plea, but as we know from Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, acceptance of a plea means acceptance of guilt. Spiro Agnew had to go. I'm just thinking of the people who put the Nixon gang together in the first place.
It's
John
all
Mitchell,
documented, David.
Another Paris conspirator.
He's guilty. It's
First
documented.
U.S. Attorney General ever to actually go to jail. Once or twice, you get one. It happens. Justice is served. Okay? Kissinger's the only one unpunished of that group. The immunity and impunity is beginning to look a bit lonely. Then look at his international colleagues, Pinochet, Suharto, General Papadopoulos in Greece. These guys are all either in jail in their own countries or are fighting desperately in the most pathetic technicalities to prevent themselves from being sent there. That's what's happened to his international colleagues. Again, the immunity begins to strike one as obscene, and the United States is sheltering this person.
There's no shame. You can't
it
shame
couldn't
the
be any
shameless. So there's, if you can't shame the shameless, how do we, because Davey's like, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Yes, of course, with the current crop of politicians, it's not going to happen. But there is a starting point. There is a beginning. The beginning is my 3-step program, ironically, about political activism, right? You get informed, you get involved, and then you get your ass out there. Because we live in a democracy, we have to demand more of our politicians. If we want justice, we have to demand it. This is a democracy. This is why, what was it, Ben Franklin? It was like, you can have your democracy if you can keep it. This is the perils of democracy. And if critical thinking and education is actively stymied and the people in that democracy allow that to happen, we get stuck in this kind of rut. Right? It's not going to happen without the people. That's where it starts, is with the people. Then it gets to the representatives. And then the representatives, hold to their word. Then they start the process. It's not going to happen magically, but there is a starting point. It's not literally impossible. With the current crop of politicians, of course, nothing's going to happen. But that does not mean change is not possible. And we should remember that we're in a democracy, because soon the United States will not be in a democracy. We will no longer be able to vote our way out of any of this, and we will have to, really, really, really have to implement our my 3-stage program here to create political change. You know what I'm saying? Because we're going to have to be getting in the streets.
Up to my right, yes.
Wow, Al Rakabi, that is shocking. I mean, that's why I'm pissing on this man's grave. Because he is just unrepentant.
I agree with your the basic theory of your book, but my question is, don't you think that the American political establishment is afraid and so corrupt that they would never bring this man to justice? Because if they do that, they should bring Bob McNamara to justice. They should bring Bush Sr. to justice.
It's Davey, guys.
There's a whole. Half of Washington should I mean,
He's
they should
everywhere.
go. I mean, I mean, and half of Washington, I mean, have committed crimes against humanity.
I'm asked to repeat the question, though I can tell that some of you certainly got the import of it. Actually, it seems that people did, I think.
Seems to be, Gonzo. Welcome back.
Used to be, during the period of the Fourth Republic in France, very crazed, corrupted colonial warfare period in the 40s and early 50s. There was a game that some friends of mine in Paris used to play. They would send the identical telegram to every minister in whatever the government was that week. The telegram, when opened, would simply read, "Fly at once, all is discovered." They would then see how many ministers went straight to the airport.
June 28th, 2001. Just a few months
If you were to
before
do that in
9/11.
Washington, you would fill the cardiac ward of Georgetown Hospital. It's certainly true. But this question comes up in different forms all the time, and what I want to urge you is this. There's every reason to single Kissinger out, and I'm sure you'll agree I've given you some. Why am I singling him out? Because he's unique. That's why. And because his survival of these episodes of gangsterism where the others have been punished is remarkable and salient. That's why.
Yeah. Sets a
So
precedent.
my injunction to you would be, don't make the best the enemy of the good. But of course, I knew once Pinochet was arrested, it wouldn't stop there. Of course it won't stop there. But
He's
my
been so
old
good with this
enemies
whole
in the
thing,
British
Gonzo.
Special Branch were not told, go round to that clinic and arrest the Chilean military dictatorship and bring justice to Chile. They were told, you have a perfectly good warrant here from a post-Franco Spanish magistrate. It's a good bill. Go round and serve it on Pinochet. Tell him he's nicked. Tell him he's under house arrest. And furthermore, tell him he can receive only visits from Baroness Thatcher. Which, if not cruel, is certainly fucking unusual. And then drag him before the House of Lords. But that's all they did. But I would never have believed any of that would happen. I never would have believed for a minute that could happen. But I did know it wouldn't stop there, and it hasn't. So in a way, your question answers itself. If you don't consent to live in a banana republic, right? If you don't just think you're a spectator and a consumer, but if you're a citizen, and if enough people do demand that justice is done for Henry Kissinger, you can take my word for it, it won't stop there.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what they're afraid of. That's why the neoliberals don't go after the Republicans. You can't have justice. Bravo indeed, Lenny.
I have two points. Does it not work? Okay, the first question is, there was some mention made at the beginning when you were just starting, or before you started, about a campaign to bring Henry Kissinger to justice. And it appears there's some organized effort that I haven't heard of within this country. Anyway, that's one question, because people always want to know what they can do. And then the second is just an observation, which I feel I'm taking a risk in saying, but I would just like to request that more women be chosen to ask questions, because I noticed that only 2 have been.
Oh, come on. Come on, what the fuck?
I'll exempt myself. Did everyone?
What in the fuck?
Very well. The lady asks, was she right in thinking that she may have missed something at the beginning, that I referred to a campaign to bring justice to Henry Kissinger? And if so, what more could I tell you about it? And then she drew attention to the fact that not enough members of the female sex were being called upon to ask questions. Was that a fair précis? If you're right. I am going to skip the second bit because I rather deftly avoided the invidia of choosing the questioners. But you can count on it. Many, many more girls would have been picked if I'd been doing the choosing. It's just that they don't speak up, you know. The second thing is, no, I'm afraid I have to disappoint you. There is no such campaign as yet, but there are what you might call concerted developments in a lot of countries, and they're being noticed by more and more people, and they're being noticed above all by the great man himself. So there's a process going on, but it needs to be much more publicized, and it needs to be much more energetically supported. There's another way, by the way, in which this may become an American domestic matter. That is another place for you to direct your mail. The criminal division of the U.S. Justice Department now has enough information in its possession to issue an indictment of General Pinochet for the setting off of a car bomb in rush hour traffic in downtown DC, just a few hundred feet from where I live, actually, in October of 1976, that murdered Orlando Letelier, the Chilean exile, and his American friend, Ronnie Moffett. It's still very illegal to let off car bombs in Washington, D.C. at rush hour, even if you don't kill an American citizen. And the question would become this: why has that indictment not been issued? They have the evidence. It is their job as Justice Department to defend us from enemies, foreign and domestic. Why not? If they have the evidence, why aren't they proceeding with it? And second, since most of what was needed to form that conclusion was known within, I would say, about 10 seconds of the bomb going off, but certainly was established within a matter of weeks after it, why has it taken 26 years to get to this point? There must clearly have been obstruction of justice in Washington at quite a high level. There was, too. I'm not guessing. I know.
Yeah, the politicization of our justice system is not new.
Is a law and order Republican regime to say that it's all right by them for foreign governments to let off car bombs in Washington, D.C.? Surely that can't be right. What will the Massachusetts delegation to Congress say about that? Don't you think you have a say in it? And if the Attorney General believes he knows who ordered this bomb set off and doesn't say, or doesn't prosecute him, ought the Attorney General not to be immediately impeached? These questions all answer themselves, and they're all for you to ask. And if you want me to say, who would it be who'd been obstructing justice in the Letelier-Pinochet investigation, I can only say, guess. But all this is coming to critical mass too, as are the various fallouts of the Chilean engagement. You know, some of us took an oath when that coup occurred, and when our friends in Chile were murdered, and when the Chilean fascists then sent people to murder our friends in Washington, D.C. We said we would never, ever forget this, and we would punish them for it. We'll see it through, and we will. It will happen. I promise you, it will.
I was going to thank the woman for making her observation and for taking the risk. So
Okay.
Oh, the woman.
Pick a woman. Let's go. All right. Yeah. It's fine. Okay. I get it. We didn't have to make this a sexist
Sir,
thing,
I wanted
though.
to tell you that my homeland, I left my homeland in 1972 because of the severe repression, political repression, Iran, under the Shah's regime. My family and myself were victim of this, of his policy. I know that Kissinger, for at least as far as I know and witness, he was almost the closest friend and military consultant, political consultant of Shah during his 25 years of his dictatorship. I would like to ask you, sir, would it be enough evidence for Kissinger to be guilty of all the crimes that Shah committed toward his people? And my other question would be, what would be your feelings or your thoughts about his policy toward Middle East in general, especially in the 60s, years of 60s and 70s and early 80s? Thank you.
Okay. I can direct you to two, and anyone else who's interested, to two very interesting books about Kissinger's relationship to the Pahlavi dictatorship. One was by Jack Anderson, and was about the way in which Kissinger helped the Shah, among other things, to manipulate the oil price, but also helped cover up the crimes committed by his notorious secret police force, the Savak, and in other ways gave him military and diplomatic and other forms of friendship and protection. The second book is by William Shawcross. It's called The Shah's Last Ride, and it's about how Kissinger tried to get a safe house for the Shah in this country when he was thrown out of Iran by his own people. But the reason it didn't find its way into my book, though I thought about it a lot, and I know a certain amount about it, is that I really think, in this case, that was a United States government institutional policy pursued ever since the Eisenhower years by all officials of all American governments and political parties, was that the Shah belonged to the United States. And also large bits of the United States
Wasn't
belonged
just
to the Shah.
Kissinger.
That was an all-party agreement. It was one of the things that really bonded the local ruling class. You couldn't very well indict just Kissinger for it, though he was an unusually enthusiastic supporter of the policy. So there, you see what I mean. I don't always say that it's all him. His policy in the Middle East, I don't know if I have time really to, your question is so generally phrased, but
yeah, she's like,
again, his policy in the Middle East was one of basically cynical short-termism, as is the case with most of his diplomacy.
Yeah.
He doesn't deserve his
kill 'em
reputation
all.
for being a cold, detached, Machiavellian diplomat at all. Most of his policies were very improvised, very unskillful, generally ending in disaster, very ill-considered, and with an eye to very short-term consequences in the American domestic market.
So true.
And that was particularly true of his supposed shuttle diplomacy in the Middle East.
What did he get us?
I can tell you a good story about his relationship with the media, if you like, to do with his views of the Intifada. If you'd like to hear a good story about Ted Koppel. But it's a bit of a come down from the seriousness of your question. It just occurs to me, because it's a thing that I try and emphasize wherever I go, is the extent to which my own profession has compromised itself in covering up for this man.
Yeah. Yeah.
We saw
it on his death. MSNBC bending over backwards.
Simon & Schuster, one of our flagship publishers,
in
knowingly
memoriam
publishing fabricated and distorted and falsified memoirs by Kissinger. We now have the documents, some of them anyway, on which he based his book, and we can prove that his scholarship standard is lower than that of David Irving. If he did what he did, if he'd done what he's done in the academy, he would be fired by now. But he's made a second fortune out of it with the connivance of the chieftains of American publishing. Anyway, to the Intifada, when the first Intifada broke out in the 1980s, there was a terrific shock in this country, as you'll remember, and in the media too, partly because nothing reported in the American press up till then had given people the impression there was likely to be a rising en masse of the people of occupied Palestine, living under a Pax Americana, who decided they'd rather die than go on living under it any longer. Anyway, there was a big shock, and the American Jewish Committee convened a series of meetings in New York to ask the advice of important people about it. And they invited Kissinger to one of their breakfasts. And he advised them the following. He said, this rebellion, which is what it is, must be put down at once, without compunction, without pity, and at great speed, and with great ruthlessness.
It was his
For this
answer to
happen, It
everything.
would be necessary first to remove all the American and foreign mass media from the scene, because what will need to be done cannot be done in front of the cameras or with reporters present. And some people at the AJC meeting were good enough to leak this, and it was the usual Kissinger pseudo-realism, of course. Imagine if they had tried to do that. This is not Machiavellianism at all. It's a sort of sadistic fantasy of the kind that I think he quite often indulges in.
Yeah.
And there were
He's not a fucking
comments
genius
about the stupidity of it, at least quite widespread in the press. But I thought, well, wait a minute. I've got a question. And so I rang Ted Koppel of Nightline, and I said, you saw the statement? He said,
Calls
yeah.
up Ted.
I said, well, I have three questions for you. One, does the man who calls for the physical removal of the American media from a large area of American foreign policy concern still hold his job as your news consultant at Nightline?
Such a great point.
Second, how much do you pay him for it? And third, Mr. Koppel, is it true that Henry Kissinger once said that if he became Secretary of State again, he would make you, Mr. Koppel, his Secretary for Europe? And is it true that you said that you'd be honored to accept? So he'd called me back, which I think was decent of him. And he said to the first question, yes, he's going to stay on as our news consultant.
Yeah.
To the second question, I'm not going to tell you how much we pay him. And to the third question, yes, he did say that about making me Secretary for Europe. And yes, I would be very honored to accept.
Wow, he just admitted it, dude. What the fuck?
Now, this is the flagship show of the American eggheads, as it were. This is not, you know,
Ted
trash
Koppel.
TV.
Trusted
this is supposed
journalist.
to be the most impartial and neutral and careful examination that TV does, and those are its standards, and that's what this guy does to everything he touches.
And now we got Jen Psaki on our
But that's
fucking
also the
TV
complicity
screens.
of my trade in his filthy career.
Disgusting.
The woman in the fourth row.
The woman.
The Kansas City Star had an article.
That's fine. I'm cool with it.
Reporting on a
All women for the rest of the night.
At ITT in the city at that time. A small stockholder got up and asked the chairman of the board
So
if
true, Lenny. Kissing Gonzo.
ITT had offered $1 million for Allende's head, and I'm wondering if you could comment on the corporate background of all this.
Yes. Should I first repeat the question? The lady reminds me that there was a report in the Kansas City Star in the early 70s, of a board meeting of ITT, the International Conglomerate of Communications, where a small shareholder had got up and asked, was it true that the company had at one point offered $1 million as a bounty for the removal of Allende from power in Chile?
What?
Would that be a fair précis of your question? And she asked me further to comment on the corporate involvement in the coup in Chile. Well, that's a now extraordinarily well-documented story. I have a little of it in my book. Richard Nixon, in his years of political failure in the 50s and 60s, had gone into the practice of law with John Mitchell, among other things, later jailbird and Attorney General. And the first person to give him any corporate work was Donald Kendall of Pepsi-Cola. And Pepsi-Cola is a huge employer in South America. And it is certainly true, and has been established beyond doubt by the congressional investigation, that on the day after Allende was elected, Donald Kendall was able to get Richard Nixon, the President of the United States, Henry Kissinger, his national security advisor, and Richard Helms, the head of the CIA, to a meeting to discuss how to restore order in Pepsi-Cola land.
What?
And it was at that meeting that Nixon wrote his famous memo saying there's an unlimited budget for doing this, make their economy scream, bring about a coup, prevent Allende from being, by the way, this was not being elected.
For soda?
He's already been chosen.
For soda
It was
pop?
to prevent him from taking office. Chile has a similar transition period to the United States. I think it's 30 days.
What is
between
happening?
Election and inauguration, and they wanted to use that time to destroy him. And yes, that was done at the behest, particularly of Kendall, but of some other businessmen too, including a man, I think I remember the name as being Janine, who was the head of ITT. But there's, you can look up Anthony Sampson's history of the corporation if you want to.
But order a hit?
It's the sort of thing that makes you think that Bertolt Brecht was not trying.
I mean, PepsiCo didn't order the hit, but they're
like
working with an org closely
Marxism
that
for
did
infants,
in their
where
favor.
The huge fat thugs in the corporate boardrooms call up the politicians who they own and ask them to opt for fascism because the workers are becoming troublesome. I mean, that's
Yes.
exactly what happened.
Yes, I talk about
And
this all the
not
time.
since
I,
United
I talk about this all the fucking time, about how the United States has no fucking problem working with fascistic authoritarians in third world countries if they're towing the Western line. It's disgusting. It's fucking disgusting. We've sown chaos across the fucking world so that we can get some fucking sweetheart deals for, I don't know, to make our fucking, McDonald's cheeseburgers cheaper. I mean, it's crazy, dude. We will work with scum of the earth as long as they're, it's almost like the Harkonnen on Dune, like the Empire. The Empire doesn't care who runs Dune as long as the the levels of spice are provided.
In Guatemala, has there been such?
The Empire in Dune did care about who ran Dune, but you know what I mean. It was just like it didn't matter. It didn't matter how evil you were or what you did to the locals, right? As long as the trucks were filled with spice.
Classic case of it. But remember that the banana republic that results is the United States, because the tactics of combining junta with plebiscite, with invisible government and bribery, become imported. They come back. The war comes back home, except that unfortunately no one fights.
Oh, we need another one. Someone clone this man. We need another one so bad it hurts, dude. Come on. We have no replacement for this man.
I was wondering if you could tell us to what degree does Kissinger either directly or indirectly continue to shape American foreign policy?
Great question.
Yes, I was asked, does Henry Kissinger still have an influence on the formulation or the conduct of American foreign policy? My impression is that that influence is waning a little bit the people in the Bush administration who remember him from the Ford administration, notably Cheney and Rumsfeld, don't particularly like what they remember, because Kissinger was a vicious infighter in both Nixon and Ford administrations. A lot of the Republican right has always thought of Kissinger as soft on communism, which, by the way, he is, and always has been.
No shit.
Because Kissinger had prevented Gerald Ford from receiving the great Alexander Solzhenitsyn at the White House, because it might upset Kissinger's friend Leonid Brezhnev. And of course, it's always been Kissinger who defends the record and successes of Mao Zedong and their right to massacre their own students. So that's why I won't take any red baiting from him, among other things. So there's some of his friends try it sometimes. I'm ready for them. Right wing doesn't like him, in my view, for quite good reasons. And in the last election, Kissinger was reduced, because he still hires himself on as consultant on foreign policy to candidates, to being the consultant for Rick Lazio, and even worse, in my opinion, as a human being, Bill Bradley. Now that's pretty pathetic. So, you know, it's like watching a dying elephant, really. No, it isn't like watching that, because that would evoke sympathy.
Is Matt from Chapo Trap House as close to a new Christopher Hitchens as we can get?
There's a chap up there.
There's a chap right there in the yellow shirt.
He's kind of Christopher Hitchens a little bit. Matt from Chapo Trap House, the beard guy.
Could you comment on a Colonel Goleniewski? He was head of Polish intelligence, later went to the KGB. He defected to the West and provided a vast amount of information, all of which was accurate, according to a statement made when he was cited by the House of Representatives for his contributions. He made the rather startling allegation that Kissinger was a Soviet spy as far back as 1946 with the code name of BOR.
Wake up!
I was very surprised to learn it. And the only thing I can say is if someone in the House of Representatives somehow supports this man and what he's said, do you have any comments on that?
I really hate saying that something comes to me as a complete surprise, that I know absolutely nothing about it at all, that I can't even speculate.
I knew it.
But I have to say that in this case.
I
I also have to be true to it. I have nothing to add. By all means.
Thank you.
I don't think they got a very good return on their investment if they were, but no, I shouldn't comment at all.
I mean, that's the sign of true intelligence there, right? He's like, I don't know.
Quiet again.
I don't know. The chicks have gone quiet again. No, whoa, fucking, get him. Me to him. He said chicks.
It's a small article in the Boston Globe some years ago in the back pages about Dr. Kissinger and one of our local people, John Silber, going to Central America on a fact-finding mission together. Shortly after that, Mr. Silber ran for governor here. I don't want to be playing conspiracy theories, but I wonder if Mr. Kissinger indulges in domestic activities as well.
The last guy was a dude. No, it's funny. It's fine. It's fine. Whatever. It's fine. Ask more women. I don't care. All good question.
Material on Kissinger first appeared, it was as a series of articles in Harper's Magazine. By the way, those of you who read that, don't get the idea you've read the book. There's much more in the book, and you need your own reference copy. But quite a bit was in Harper's. And John Silber was one of the people who wrote in, because I'd mentioned that Central America Commission. Reagan appointed Kissinger the chair of a commission on Central America, on which John Silber served, and which Oliver North was the security man for and stuff. And it went to Central America and it whitewashed the death squads and the Guatemalan government and all the things you'd expect it to do. But because there were a couple of sort of soggy Democrats on it for balance, there was some recommendations about, well, maybe we should link some of our donations of aid to less death squad activity, stuff like that, bleats like that went in. So Tip O'Neill kind of stuff went in. As a result of which, there was a dissenting minority report saying, the hell with all that, it's soft on communism, signed by Kissinger and Silber, dissenting from their own hardline report. I mean, nothing is mad or cruel enough for these guys. So I had a great exchange with Silber in the correspondence columns about that. And do I think Henry Kissinger intervenes domestically? By all means, I think so. I mean, I think that's very much to the purpose. What Henry Kissinger believes and has learned from the theories of history that he started with and the examples of history he studied and the sorts of people with whom he scraped acquaintance in his academic and political career, that the lessons of dictatorship learned from history and from contact with dictators overseas need to be assimilated and applied to the United States of America. He makes it very clear in all his books that the enemy is democracy. Okay, in particular, it's the enemy to the conduct of foreign policy. But of course he doesn't leave it at that. He wanted the Nixon administration to become a full-fledged authoritarian regime. He wanted it to break the law, have the courage to do so, to destroy the evidence, to face down
It can happen
Congress,
here, folks.
and all the rest of it. It's
happening right now.
It's the classic demonstration of what happens to metropolitan imperialist countries. They cannot oppress other people and themselves be free. Some people realize this reluctantly. Some of them deny the realization even when it's presented to them, and some welcome it. And Kissinger is one of the third type.
He's like, yeah, that's how it is. You can't, you yourself can't be free if the nation you live under is oppressing others. Right. Yeah. Absolute legend. Woo! Ya boy, Christopher Hitchens. Christopher Hitchens. Get it! No, that's great. And then they're just going to do some housekeeping, whatever. But there you go, folks. That's the Henry Kissinger Burn in Hell Sunday special coming at you from the News Underground and your boy Abandoned Nihilism, a.k.a. The Harbinger. I challenge anybody to any other political streamer covered Henry Kissinger like I did. I challenge you. Probably talking about some stupid drama. Good die young. So true. So true, Lenny. So true. But yeah, there you go, folks. Hopefully, if you didn't know anything about Henry Kissinger, you're not sure what the hype was, not sure why people are pissing on his grave, well, now you know. Man was an absolute, unrepentant, shameless monster that... You know, and that's one thing to just be a dickhead like that, right? That's one thing. The problem is he's embraced by, U.S. foreign policy wonks, Clintonites, MSNBC heads, neoliberals, of course, the right wing. He's right in line with the right wing. Fuck, man. He's Trump is exactly what, not Trump, right, in terms of like how he presents himself, but the MAGA movement is exactly what he wants. Hitch slap videos. Hitch slap. What, people slapping Christopher Hitchens? But there you go. So true. Tom Clayton. So true. I mean, R.I.P. Jimi Hendrix. Mac Miller. Yeah, I mean, I didn't like his music, but very tragic. He died very early. Totally. Tom Clayton. Totally. But no, R.I.P. to all the good ones out there. I mean, it's just... There you go. There you go, man. The Crimes of Henry Kissinger. We got this great documentary as well, recommended by Al Rakabi. I put in the documentary section of the Discord. Make sure you check it out, folks. Kurt Cobain, another great example. God, absolute legend. Who's that amazing author? Totally Wild, Las Vegas, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. That fella shoots himself with his family around. Hunter Thompson. But he's more of a questionable character. There's definitely. I wish his political career went somewhere, though. You know, in this crazy world of new politics, Hunter Thompson's political career would actually probably, you know, have been more successful than the Tiger King. These rich white supremacist fucks have access to all the private health facilities. That's why they all die really old. There might be something to that. You know, of course, we saw with Trump when he caught COVID. It's just they pumped him full of all kinds of shit. He was great. Everyone forgets this. Donald Trump, after he caught COVID, when he was leaving the hospital, this is true. This is documented. He thought it was a good idea. He was going to put on a Superman shirt and he was going to rip open his dress shirt, the Superman logo. Guys, he is an actual. In some aspects, Trump is an actual toddler. Right now, wearing a Hunter S. Thompson Sheriff T-shirt. Now, yo, I wish his political career went somewhere. They could pay for these super cures that the working man would never have access to. I mean, a great example is, of course, that was it mollycoddle, midroconal, antibodies. What is it? Hold on. Yeah, monoclonal antibodies, the ones that Joe Rogan paid for, and he was like bragging. He's like bragging on his fucking terrible show. Oh, you don't need to get the vaccine. You just do these $1,000 treatments, you know, every other week or something. You don't need to get the vaccine. Just keep going to the doctor. And then the motherfucker catches COVID, gives it to fucking Chappelle, gives it to everybody. I'm fucking I'm babbling here. Props to everybody that's here, everybody in the chat. Tom Clayton, Woke Patriot, your boy Davey, your boy Lenny, #1 financial contributor to the stream. Lenny, make sure you check out that YouTube channel. Accidents waiting to happen. Right there. I'm sure once Lenny gets back from his travels, he'll get back into it. Kissing Gonzo, thank you so much for coming back and your comments. Very much appreciated. Big props to your boy Al Rakabi. Thanks again for that documentary. We'll take a look at that and see what we can do. Welcome back, Ronald McMahon. I don't know if you stuck around, but thank you for coming back. If you did, Snowmo Bobo Bro, thank you for being here. Big props to you, Snow. Thank you for coming back. Big props to Davin. Thank you, Davin. Big props to Susan Turpin. Thank you, Susan Turpin, for stopping in. I doubt you stuck around. It's probably not the right vibe for a nice person like you. Zeo Duke, welcome back, Zeo Duke. John Axel, big props to you, John Axel, being early in the chat there. Thank you so much. Rogan is such an entitled guy, man. Give bro a mic and he becomes an asshole. It's true. From personal experience, it's true. He should stick to UFC. I mean, it's the problem. The problem with rich guys like Rogan is that they get to a certain level where they don't really have to pay attention. They still get all the attention. People still treat them like experts. And they watch 5 minutes of news. They read maybe a little bit. They catch a headline here and there, and then they step in it time and time again. When Rogan speaks, he's completely. It's like he has no idea who his audience is. It's bananas. His audience, $40,000, $50,000 a year dudes, right? And he's selling them some kind of fucking fantasy. It's so funny because he's like a rich elitist. Should have retired from USC. I mean, it's like I don't want to be mad at the guy's success, but the problem is that his money shields him from the consequences of what he's advocating for. So he's advocating not directly, but sometimes directly, but usually indirectly. He's advocating for right-wing policies and right-wing bullshit. But he's shielded from the consequences of those things. In fact, it benefits him. Tax cuts for the rich. I think COVID, I don't know if, it's interesting how COVID did bring the right wing out in a lot of people, all just because of it's and there's we were supposed to be scared of all these things that were supposed to happen from taking the vaccine. We didn't know. We're more than fine. Everything's fine. But it's like the ramifications of that ignorance haven't left. We're still having to deal with this pushback. You see people like Breaking Point's there, Sagar Ingenetti, basing a lot of his politics off the overreach of COVID, and it's proof that the lefties are just as authoritarian as the right, because they allowed corporations to mandate masking, and they allowed corporations to mandate vaccinations when it was already, you're not allowed to get a job if you don't have your fucking immunization. You know what I mean? You can't be walking around giving people fucking chicken pox or whatever. I don't know, whatever you get immunized for. The fucking the polio. You can't be giving people. Is polio? Can you give people polio? Is that a thing you can? No, I don't think you can give people polio. I don't know what we're immunized for, but it's so funny. All the people that are making a massive stink about immunizations were fully immunized because they went to public school. And that's the only way to attend public school, is if you're properly immunized. So it's hilarious. With vaccinations flowing through their veins, we're never going to get vaccinated. Well, pure blood. Wow, we deviated from Henry a little bit. All right, folks. Big props to everybody. That was my Fuck You, Henry Kissinger special. Hope you had a good time. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Give your mother a call. Peace in that motherfucking Middle East. Glory to the Ukrainian democracy. Let's not forget, get informed, get involved, and get your ass out there, folks. It's that three-step program. It's just as easy to create political change as it is to jerk your gherkin. Fuck you, Henry Kissinger. Suck my entire taint, bitch. Thank you so much, everybody. Have yourself a good Sunday. Fuck you, Henry Kissinger. Fuck you, Henry Kissinger. Fuck you, Henry Kissinger. Thank you again, Lenny. Lenny rocks. Fuck you, Henry Kissinger. Fuck you, Henry Kissinger. Woke Patriot, thank you so much. Davin, have a good night. Fuck you, Henry Kissinger. Fuck you, Henry Kissinger. Fuck you, Henry Kissinger. Fuck you, Henry Kissinger. Yeah, it's a news underground, bitch. It's a news underground. Abandoned nihilism. Abandoned nihilism. Fuck you, Henry Kissinger. All right, everybody, take care of yourself. Thank you so much.